for some reason it required a computer restart. But
that's okay.
Happy to jump in.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which sadly is still wrapped in a pandemic. We just heard at the COP26 Leaders Forum there, the Palau leader was bemoaning the absence of Marshall Islands leader because of COVID-19 restrictions on travel. This is an inequitable climate conference in many ways, and unfortunately, global events are making it more so just through the realities of getting people to these kinds of meetings. They're taking a break there now, so I'm going to close that screen. And welcome here Max Boykoff, who is a longtime friend and an explorer of the media landscape around climate change, and Amy Westervelt, who is one of the most innovative and I'd say impactful journalists working on the climate beat these days.
Thanks, Andy.
Well, the work you do at the interface of these various media, building websites, running podcasts, narrative podcasts, as well as ones that are just sort of informational. Really, it's really truly innovative. So it's great that you're out there. And again, Max Boykoff, who wrote a paper way back. I guess you got my attention with that paper on balance as bias in the media with your brother a very long time ago, 2003 or 2004. And
Yeah.
we're going to talk about all this today. Hold on, I'm just going to share screen to show a couple things as soon as that video stops playing. So, and I just was, as you could see a minute ago, I was showing you activity from live from Glasgow, where there's so much more media now around climate than there was when I started on this beat back in the days of print magazines and the like. My totem here, 1988. Before the UN Framework Convention, before all that stuff. But back then there was maybe 4 or 5, 6 people writing actively about climate. And then through kind of the aughts, it was getting into the dozens, and now it's hundreds for sure. And that shows in the data that Max's Media Climate Observatory is tracking. And we have to ask, though, what makes media matter? So the question of the day today for us is, how do you make climate media matter? It's a little different than even just telling a better story. It's like, what happens then with that story? So let's start with Max, just because you can give a little bit of that historical context and what drove you to even dive in with climate media as your focus. Was it that paper back in around 2002, 2003, or were you already on this question?
Yeah, that was the beginning. I could tell you a very long story about that, but maybe I'll try and shorten it. Basically, so my brother and I, at the time, he was a political science PhD student at American University, and I was a PhD student in environmental studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And well, to back up a little bit, I was in the Peace Corps in the late 1990s and in Honduras during a terrible hurricane, Hurricane Mitch. Some of you may remember. And it was Category 5 as it came on land, really devastated the area where I lived. And part of the story is that I was really fascinated by my own firsthand experiences in a pretty rural space. And then what I later, once it took a little while for me to get out and take next steps, but then I was fascinated by the international media coverage that at times didn't really match up with my experience. And I was also fascinated by the fact that most people just flew into Tegucigalpa, the capital city, reported from there about what they saw, and then left.
Right. That never happens.
Yeah. So
toe touch reporting.
Starting to turn this into a long story, but shortening that, my brother and I was back doing field research in Honduras, and he came along. We were just talking about these disconnects and talking about, where we see them, and we just developed this project. I mean, I was really a second-year grad student, so I utilized a sociology class that I was taking on methods, and we wrote this paper together, did the research, and we very surprised, probably shouldn't have been, but at the reception that it got. And I think it was fueled in part by your interest in it, Andy, at that time, where you invited me into your class at Columbia School of Journalism. It was also fueled by it was captured.
God, I'd forgotten that.
Yeah, yeah, that was a long time ago. I was there for my cousin's bar mitzvah, so I was able to. I'm getting a little personal here. So it started with that, and then it was included in Al Gore's film, and I think that really generated a conversation that about how media were covering climate change in broad terms.
And Amy, you know the issue here, which was the old norm of balance, as it clearly becomes a bias when the reality shifts toward a certain direction, and we're stuck with going to yaysayers and naysayers. And your work these days in your well, I'll just show you your brand spanking new website is about the history of propaganda, essentially, in these arenas. This is an incredibly useful resource that draws on so much of the documentation and reporting you've been doing. What drove you in this? You didn't grow up to be a climate reporter either. I'm not sure any of us did. I've been at this half my life, and my life is now 65 years long. So,
yeah.
But so here you are. What was driving you toward not just the story of climate, but the story of climate?
Oh gosh, sorry.
It's okay.
Hello. Does that sound okay? Okay.
Yeah. Good.
So, well, I had this. I kind of stumbled into this because I was freelancing for lots of different places, and I was very broke, and I was about to not be able to pay my rent. And my friend was like, "Hey, I work for this engineering firm, and we need someone to write some case studies for us. It's really boring, but it pays well and it pays fast." And I said, "Okay, I'm in." And the case study I ended up writing was risk mitigation work that they had done for Shell to re-engineer their oil platforms for sea level rise. And this was like I was doing this work in maybe 2000, 2001, but it was work that had been done in the 90s. And I thought, Shell was like not admitting that climate change was even going to be a thing then, and so I started looking into, whether or not this had been covered and how it had been covered. And that's actually like what got me into looking at how climate change was being covered at the time in general. And then I spent a lot of time as a clean tech reporter. And there again, I don't know, I would get assigned these things, and my editors would be like very excited about the potential of this new tech. And it just seemed really, I don't know, just like it was trying to tell a particular story. And I wasn't sure if it was the accurate one. So yeah, that's me. And I mean, I was just telling someone this the other day, like, I think I have a thing where I'm very compelled to fight for the underdog. And I feel like in climate, that's sort of all of us, with the exception of like 20 people. So, so I think that's part of it too.
Yeah. But this is so interesting. Essentially, you're focusing on this, as I said a minute ago, on the story of climate change and the story. So the focus is the storytelling, the story shaping, the propaganda, how things in the real world relate to these narratives that get built around them, and including the green tech narratives, not all of which are fossil funded. So it's like
no, it's like it's the information ecosystem that we have, which I do think was in large part built by corporations for corporations, and now we're in this place where just the whole way that we understand things is so warped by that. So yeah.
Totally. So we're just going to get back to Max. Max, when you wrote that paper, and when the early aughts, Twitter hadn't happened yet. Twitter was like 2006, 2007. That's when I joined, and Twitter now is this monster. It's a place where the media live, and people who want to influence the media live. And there's a whole nother story to explore around Facebook, but that's really different. Facebook is different. Twitter is. How has that worked with this sort of balances bias and the other sort of framing issues you've seen, Max, looking at this as a scholar? Even as you track stories now around climate change, what counts as a story, or is an updated post a new story? So what's changed about the landscape that you see as either underappreciated or really driving things in ways that are problematic or good?
It's a big and great question. I'd love to ask you the same thing, because I know that you've been a student at these times as well. But honoring me being a guest, I will start at least by saying that things have changed dramatically, though some things haven't changed much at all. One thing to just mention is that while that paper turned out to be really influential, possibly one of the more influential student papers of any grad school experience, that a lot has changed during the interim years. And one of the things, while I'm glad that our work was continued to circulate, but to this day, people continue to cite it. And really the data gathering was only through 2002. And it was really a point in time. And so what I did with several former students, now colleagues, and some current students, is we actually ran the numbers for the last 15 years, and we just published that in Environmental Research Letters.
Oh, awesome.
So it was available in August, and we have it open access, and that's been getting traction. It was led by Lucy McAllister, who's a Technological University of Munich postdoc, and 5 others, including me. And we documented how things had changed. We actually did the study in the US major print press, but then expanded it out to 4 other countries. And so we captured 17 publications across the US, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. And so we found overall that coverage of human contributions to climate change has improved. And so things are a lot different. 90% of overall coverage. It wasn't 100% in any case. And so one of the sort of interesting things that came out of that paper is that we were then able to break down which outlets were the higher performers and which were the lower performers. And in doing that, part of the story is, yes, things have changed, to your question, where it has become more accurate on that point of human contributions to climate change. But then there still are some outlets that are lagging, and 2 of the 4 are Rupert Murdoch-owned outlets, and all 4 are what are considered historically conservative outlets. And for bringing that up, if you go to Figure 3, if you're able to, that's the one that I'm talking about. So there's that, and then I think you were asking a much bigger question about Twitter and what constitutes news. And so, while we did this research, it was really time intensive. And we still aren't capturing the full range. And so there's been this democratization of content production. Who is authorized has really changed a lot. And with that democratization has come obviously a dystopian element as well of fake news and post-truth and these sorts of things. There are researchers, I've been a part of a little bit of work that tracks Twitter, because the geolocation piece is often not enabled, but it's still hard to start to track it to places with research, but it's getting better. And so in your question, Andy, we were able to, and it takes a lot of time to then provide that update, but it still is just part of a larger set of challenges. And there's so much that's swirling. And I saw your post this week about advertising that's embedded within stories. That's a huge, huge part of this as well.
Yeah, that was particularly distressing to see. That
pull quote thing was so bad. Too. Yeah, but the pull quote placement was a new one. That's bad, really bad.
I couldn't agree more. It seems to be this slip-slidey, shape-shifting
It's
process.
bizarre.
And
To me, I feel like we're starting to have conversations about whether outlets should even take fossil fuel ads at all. But then we also have outlets going so much further and actually making the ads for people. Ugh, I don't know.
I know that's T Brand, my former employer,
Yeah.
T Brand Studios. They all have this.
So
So
does the Washington Post. They do it too. It's
yeah,
not just,
yeah.
Yeah.
It just gets to this reality that the landscape is changing really faster than anyone can keep up. And I think,
Mhm.
Amy, part of the value of your work is it's exploratory. You're kind of sticking with it iteratively, and I'm sure you always feel like you're overwhelmed. And
Yes.
and one thing I wanted to ask you too, and we're going to get Beth Osnes is with us too. She's in the green room having some of the Halloween candy that was left over. I'm just kidding. But to talk about the creativity side, but you, as I said at the beginning, you kind of exemplify your own kind of shape-shifty evolution and tracking of the story. Is that
Mhm.
something? But at the same time, I feel like you are probably also always struggling to be sustainable financially. The New York Times
Yeah.
has really been thriving, even with the changes. They've got more people in the newsroom than ever. They're mostly paid a lot less than when back in the day. But
Yeah.
do you feel like this is a losing battle? Are you feeling? I know. Well, Emily Atkin was recently
Mhm.
tweeting and rejiggering her webcast. I mean, her newsletter to just
Newsletter.
stay sane. To stay
Mhm.
sane. So, is it possible to stay at this and be sustainable?
It's interesting because I feel like I'm seeing Emily's a good example. So many of us climate journalists have left staff jobs and gone independent. In part because of just kind of institutional blockers to telling the story the way that we want. And I mean, not just Emily, but David Roberts now. And I don't know, there's multiple people. So in some ways it's good that that's an option, but then I also think that to your point, it's hard to sustain, I freelance for print stuff still, and then I run a podcast production company. So we do several of our own podcasts, but then we also produce podcasts for other people and or help other people distribute their podcasts. So that's a ton of work. And then I also do a weekly newsletter, and it's a lot. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to just it's not to fund my private jet travel. Let's just put it that way.
Well, it gets back to what you said also at the beginning, which is the thing that drove you was sort of the underdog. Who's getting lost in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what drives me, but I also I'm able, I have this sort of, I don't know, I have the sort of personality that can put up with it for a long time, and I also I'm married, and my husband also has an income, and all of these things. I don't think that being able to be self-sufficient and do everything yourself should be a requirement for working in this field. Yeah.
Yeah, and it takes a village. One thing that I lament these days is that actually I wrote a piece about this a couple months ago on my newish blog, whatever you want to call it, that we're how do I want to put this? There can be a lot more communal sense of how tackling these problems. Back in the days of blogging as I knew it in 2007, 2008, 2009, when I was doing .earth as a reporter, and even beyond, there was a lot of cross-referencing. We're all linking to each other's stuff. David Roberts and I didn't agree on a lot of things, but we were always engaging. And now, for the sake of sustainability, I see a lot of self-reference, much more of a closed track.
Absolutely.
Everyone now needs their micro little $4.99 a month audience.
Yeah,
And so it's
not great. I think it's not great. Like there's a huge amount of competition in media in general, and I think that it's only gotten worse with this. I've had the experience actually a couple times of trying to collaborate with people and then kind of being massively screwed over for my efforts. So which is unfortunate, because for me, I'm like, I need to pay my rent, but other than that, like, I don't really care if like people, I don't feel a lot of ownership over the stuff that I do. I would rather like work with lots of people. But yeah, I don't know. I think actually maybe Twitter might be part of it too. It's really encouraged journalists to become like media personalities in their own right, and to sort of become like platforms. And it's like I don't know. It's a whole other job that people have, and sort of the way even that you get, the way that you sell a book anymore, right? Is like, what's your platform? What's your, what kind of audience can you bring? All of that kind of thing. So I think that's contributed to it too. But I agree. I really wish that actually there was more outlets and individuals working together on projects, because you just get more done that way. And it's fun. Like whenever I do actually work with other teams of reporters, it's super fun. I like working with other people. So anyway.
Yeah, and even there's that what's it called, the where people are co-publishing pieces.
Covering Climate Now.
Well, there's that, but there was another one that predated it. Oh, God, my brain. This piece was published originally on X. It's sort of a network of climate. Reporting.
Yes, the Climate Desk, maybe.
Yeah, the Climate Desk. One? Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that isn't yet collaborative purely. It's more just sort of sharing content as opposed to sharing ideas. One thing I try to do at Columbia, I'm trying to build relationships with international networks of journalists who, Global Press, which is female journalists around the world in developing countries. Mm-hmm. I did some work with them to bring them develop new ways to think about what is a climate story. Climate risk to me is a story frame that reveals all kinds of things. Climate justice is really just the lack of climate justice is really overdose. Where is risk the greatest? For whom? So that when you use that framing, it takes it away from stopping climate change, which we all have to do too, but climate risk is all around. So some of this and that comes through, that only really works if you have collaborative, open conversations. Like, what's your risk? What does risk mean to your community? So it's not just the New York Times or NPR doing grand stories.
Right. Yeah. I feel like, does that happen in academia too, Max, where like there's people are sort of, I don't know, like competitive in a way about their research?
Yes.
I'm bringing in Beth too now because I see she's laughing. Oh no, that never happens in academia.
It seems to, from what I've heard behind the scenes. Yeah. Hi, Beth.
Beth and I, we collaborate all the time, which is super fun. And I'd say yes, but we have incomes. We're really privileged in that way. So long as we're ticking the boxes and we're doing the work, I think there's less pressure on us to build the kinds of profiles and things that you're talking about, Amy. I think that enables then collaboration. And so we consequently, like Beth and I, collaborate a lot. And if we had to feel like we're in competition, that would be a pretty terrible thing.
Yeah, it sucks. I don't like it. Don't dislike. No.
Yeah.
But it happens. I mean, for other reasons, people do still compete in other ways. And sometimes it boggles my mind, but it's just part of human nature, I suppose.
So Beth, I just want to sort of bring you fully into the conversation. Beth has a background in theater and arts and choreography and dance, and got hitched up with Max coming at this as a scholar and social scientist through, well, partially developing this thing called Inside the Greenhouse. I mean, we're all inside the greenhouse. But I don't know whether you feel that things are moving in a good direction in that arena, which is distinct from the journalism arena. It's creative climate communication. How did that get going, and how could that ramify?
I think we were looking to to tell a different story that didn't put people's backs up against the wall, that didn't generate more polarization, but rather helped us find ways that we could find what unites us above what divides us, kind of our shared humanity. And I think the way that Max and I have been most interested in doing that recently has been through our climate comedy. And
awesome.
We featured Andy's song "Liberating Carbon" the year before last in our big show that we do on Earth Day. And but the thing that's so interesting is we're just writing articles for the Environmental Education Research Journal. And we did research on our students from this past spring. And these students were all engaged in this really fun co-creation of climate comedy with professional comedians. And when we were like, asking our students their relationship to comedy, and we did research with our students, and of 40 students, when we asked them, to what extent do you expect or want your information that you will be getting on issues like climate change to be coming from comedic sources, what we got from those 40 students was 56%. They expect 56% of their media from comedic sources. And they mentioned things like, TikTok, all the different late night shows that you'd expect, Trevor Noah, all those different things. But it's sobering to think that the generation that's coming of age, and this is largely environmental studies students who are in their capstone course, answering this survey like this. So to be looking at media that comes through climate comedy seems really, really right point on. And this kind of user-generated media sources, these kind of multimodal media sources that Max and I have been exploring through Inside the Greenhouse with Becca Safran and Phaedra Pizzula.
So is there, not every journalist should be a comedian, and not every comedian is doing serious journalism. So there's a mix. One thing that I think I've figured out in this arena is that there's no silver bullet. There's no one blog. There's no one front page story in the New York Times. There's no one approach to community building through communication that's going to make the magical moment on climate change. It's a prismatic issue. And even, by the way, getting back to something Amy and I just wrote about too, the hearing last week, the Slippery Six hearing. To me, the hearing itself was a form of propaganda in the sense that for Republican audiences, all they saw was the story that was shaped by the Republicans on the committee, which is rising gas prices. Why are you yelling about stopping the oil drilling when we have rising gas prices? And the story that was framed around for progressives was all demonstrating again the duplicity and malfeasance of these big companies. And I'm trying to think. I'm sorry, I got distracted for how that fit into what we were just talking about, because it's that kind of day.
What I might add.
Maybe it wasn't that it was comedic. I'm sorry.
Well, if I could just jump in, and maybe Andy, you can think of what you were going to say, is that we need to be much more creative. I think we're performing stories and taking up roles that seem to then speak to audiences and fail to make the kind of progress that we need to make. And so that's where, with your notion, there's no silver bullet. That's where, our collaboration, some inroads through comedy with people, and young people in particular, that otherwise won't engage or may feel really burdened and by what they're seeing going on. And so,
are you guys working with the Good Energy Project at all? Do you know about this? That they're like trying to? Yeah, you are.
No, I know about them, but we're not working with them yet.
Oh, I feel like maybe, well, yeah, maybe it would be a good match for you guys because they're trying. I know they're working right now on a sort of like a handbook for TV and film producers that are trying to get lots of different types of climate stories into TV and film. Not so much in the vein of like, and now here's our climate episode, but like just weaving it into stories that they're already doing, and like how could you make it part of a character's life, and how could you have a like realistic character that's that cares about climate or whatever. Anyway, yeah, I think they have a section on comedy, so I'm gonna like let them know to get in touch with you because they asked me to
check it out.
review their guidebook.
The thing that's interesting about this too is that there is no silver bullet, but there are things that we can learn. And what we learn when we research the ways we do with our students is that keeping it solutions focused really made a difference. And we partnered with Project Drawdown to really use that very handy, accessible list. We really utilized the social sciences that tell us what makes for effective climate communication. We infuse all of that in the co-creation of climate. And there's a great quote from one of our students who said, after this whole experiment had occurred, we matched our students with professional comedians. They made sure that the science was correct around the climate solutions. The comedians made sure it was really funny. And one of our students reflecting on the experience, the student said, climate comedy doesn't make light of the serious issue of climate change, but sheds light and hope onto the topic. A comedic take on climate change can offer hope because it made the issue not seem as threatening and in my control. Previous courses consisted of dense, consuming, data-driven material that only perpetuated my fears and left me feeling hopeless. This class and co-creating climate comedy specifically relieved me from those fears. And I just think that when we look at the choices people make when they're afraid and ashamed, they're lousy choices. That's bad behavior generally. So getting people in a place where they're just well enough to be making in like choices that are based in constructive hope and other more positive emotions. Those that we come to better action when we're motivated to act from those spaces and those conditions.
So that gets at having a community, being part of the community is part of that too. The crosstalk, making sure you're thinking about having a comedian check something you're doing over here. Even that, just having that cross check with someone else coming out from a different vantage point is
there was also
valuable.
this cool factor that made a huge difference. Like Max and I think I can speak for both of us when I can say that we never had a class where we had like a cooler experience on Zoom where our students were like, whoa, somebody had to leave to go to a meeting with Stephen Colbert, one of our comedians. And once they realized that they were with folks from like New York and LA, and they were like, oh, I'm going to show up and be funny. It was really a lot of fun and purpose-driven.
That's so cool. I thought that Stephen Colbert's late night show that he did on climate was like by far the best of all of them. Was that thanks to you guys?
Who was it? Was Max? Who was it who works for Stephen Colbert?
Nicole Conlon.
Nicole.
Yeah.
It was so good. Like it was super funny and also just like extrememely spot on. Just in terms of like the information and whatever, I was like, oh, we need more of this stuff. Yeah.
That's great.
So I just in Twitter, I just put in the hashtag COP26 and the word comedy, and there's some interesting stuff going on there.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Hip hop. Yeah, they're doing great work.
Oh, that's great. The Hip Hop Caucus. Awesome.
Meet your mama's heat wave.
Really good.
So that's good.
There's going on all the time, and that's good news because I mean, we need to be trying to address this in all kinds of ways that are going to engage people.
Yeah, the other thing that relates also to what I was saying about the hearing last week, and relates to the evolution of the communication landscape since Max's paper back in 2003, 2004, is that questioning, where do we have to widen the conversation out to people who are already not engaged on climate? And I guess the Colbert effect is part of that, but that's still, that audience is definitely not, that's a pretty niche audience too, in the sense that Colbert is stridently anti-Trump and all that. And I know we could have a whole long conversation about politics and climate change, that there's certain people you're never going to reach.
Mm-hmm.
But is there a wider reach here is there a way to look at that wider landscape outside of people who are already thinking climate comedy and not just, not engaged with these issues every day?
I think some of this comes to the work that we do. Our public schools may be, a last bastion of where we have people, really committed to communities that really represent a wide, region. And we do, a lot of work with Inside the Greenhouse is around, we've been, adapting the drawdown solutions to a 5th grade adaptation level so that students have access to top climate solutions when they're in the classroom. These kind of actions that are really seeking to communicate out climate in ways that, we have a whole store of embodied ways that young people can be engaging that are funny and embodied. And, it's an embodied issue. The environment, we experience the harm and we contribute to it through our bodies, through our actions. So it seems our response could be more embodied and active.
So Amy, is there a way to propagate what you're doing into some of these other levels of education, for example, like rigged, going back to rigged, that's an amazing resource. How do we connect that with wider audiences?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, when I initially started pulling it together, I honestly was hoping that other journalists would just steal the documents and do stuff with them, so I hadn't thought much beyond that. But yeah, it's funny because actually, as I was working on this, we did a whole series on the public school system and actually how susceptible it is to corporate influence in curricula, and how hard it is conversely to get climate stuff into schools. So I don't know. I'm very interested in that. And I think that I don't know. It's tough. I was talking to someone who works on education policy about, could there be a national policy that would improve this? And they were like, well, that would require funding public schools appropriately so that they're not dependent on private sources of money or activities or materials or whatever, so I don't know. I every time I start to look into a lot of this stuff, it's tied into lots of other forms of injustice, which is why I think those things are fairly inextricable. Yeah, I don't know. So anyway, I mean, I would like to see more kind of critical thinking and media literacy curricula in schools. And I do think there are people working on that. I know there's a project out of Stanford that's working on that. There's one at Rutgers too. So that's great too, because above and beyond the climate problem, I think it'd be good for students to have the tools to be able to kind of, see the forest for the trees where information is concerned and apply some critical thinking to what they're getting and all of that kind of stuff. But
well, that's also that was at the heart of your piece in Rolling Stone, at least to me on the hearing.
Yes.
You're talking about big information being the bigger problem than even oil company manipulation of climate information.
Well, yeah, I kind of think, of course we have runaway climate change. If it wasn't that, it would have been some other catastrophic problem, because we have a long history of companies being allowed to mislead the public to benefit themselves, and I think it's a little bit problematic how much the climate space leans on the big tobacco story as a framework for things. Because it's okay, yeah, the big tobacco guys got hauled into Congress and they did have to pay a bunch of money in the master settlement, but they went on to increase their profits 70% in the years following that accountability, and they're now the same companies that are misleading the public on vaping. So did we actually address the problem there, or did we, make a big show of punishing these people and not actually solve the system that enabled them?
Yeah, in fact, the piece that I just wrote that ran yesterday, whenever that was, yesterday, Sunday or Monday.
What is time? Yeah.
Whatever. I quoted your piece, and I went on to dig in on those the data on big tobacco, and
Yeah.
so it feels like there's several issues there that not only did that framing of that hearing not really match the tobacco issue. I think it's going to falter personally as a strategy. You also have this reality, as you said, that big tobacco is bigger than ever.
Yeah,
it's going to be $1 trillion market by around 2030.
And like, that was one consumer product, non-essential consumer product. That, and it, so I'm like, we didn't have a huge success, and it was one tiny consumer product that's not necessary for anyone really. I don't know what we get by aspiring to that on climate. So I don't know. Sorry. I feel like I'm being like the Debbie Downer of this conversation.
I think that maybe some of the remedy is doing the local things, like when you can dig into a local, like the ACE Coalition is great for the national efforts that we're making, but when you dig into like local school districts and even at the state level, you can start to really like align it to state standards. You can align it in a way that you're not even using the word climate, but you're giving all that education and all that rich information that is tied to a local reality. We're doing that now with a Shine curriculum that we're creating with Patrick Chandler. And it's tied in with the fossils in the classroom, so that going back into fossil fuels. And, once you get young people doing that in a way that it culminates in a public sharing, you're getting parents coming. So I think there is hope. And, most of our climate issues are experienced and best dealt with at the local level, that the things that are relevant to us, so we aren't just overwhelmed. We just have forest fires and floods and droughts, and that's what we're going to handle here in Colorado or in Boulder.
Right. Well, and I think that kind of community building is sort of what we're going to need to survive climate impacts too, right? Is that like our people around us that are all helping each other out. So I find that to be sort of, and also it's kind of where you see a lot less partisanship too.
Social capital.
Yeah.
Which is resilience when you look at it, it's social resilience. And I think there's something to be like when you get youth being the people who are sharing out these communications. It's not journalism, but it's, youth authored expressions that people listen in a really different way. And they're doing it with butts in these folding chairs at, high school gymnasiums in a way that they're in community, cheek to cheek, as it were.
So, at Boulder, how big is the focus on the audience side of the communication question, as opposed to the content generation, creative climate communication part of it? Do you have your own media literacy or curriculum there, or is this still?
Are you talking about my department or inside the greenhouse?
No, I mean at Boulder, at UC Boulder.
I mean,
a lot of what you do inside the greenhouse is on the content generation. It's stuff to get.
But it's more than content generation. It's really it's supporting the everyone in being content creators. So this idea of audience becomes a little bit more obsolete, and people become
good.
So like I think that's the transition we're making, is people are less wanting this one-way communication model. And I think people are wanting to participate in it, and they're doing that through TikTok and through Twitter, and they're claiming that. But there are other multimodal forms in which they can be taking that authorship as well. The comedy show is one way we're doing it. We have a Green Suits initiative where people are doing it through an embodied way. We have a lot of different ways that people are they are the content creators, and those are the people we're really kind of focusing on.
I'll say,
and it's their communities of influence that we're really seeking to reach through these communications.
I'll say too that we have brought together several of these efforts, and we have this new center that launched during the pandemic called the Creative Climate Communication and Behavior Change Center.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
it's actually a merging of, how audiences are taking up, resisting, or ignoring certain ways of approaching this. And so Lee Van Boven, who's over in psychology, who's done a lot of really good work, is helping us with that part of the question, Andy, and others are too. And so I think, the question that you asked before about, scaling up, Amy, your project, it's the scaling up part is one that I ask myself all the time,
Yeah.
because I'm stating the obvious, but at present, the scale of our responses and our actions are nowhere near the scale of the challenges we're facing. And so that's where coordination comes in. That's where these kinds of conversations I find really valuable to share, to connect people up, to try and do more effective work. And I'd love, Andy, for you to. I know I maybe I can't ask you questions in this format, but
Sure.
what do you think is really exciting about sort of scaled up work that's going on right now?
Well, I just can't agree enough with what you're saying. The big shift for me from storyteller to kind of conversation enabler started with my blog at the Times. I was still writing stories. When I went to Greenland, I did a blog, but it wasn't really a blog. In 2004, I was writing a big story. Along the way, I was telling little stories about the process of writing the big story, but it didn't have comments. It wasn't engagement. And I began to move more and more toward a really bidirectional approach with information, both with expertise to get experts talking to each other. Sometimes it was just simply through sending an email to 10 different scientists about a new paper coming out, as opposed to just doing the old journalism thing. Hey, there's a paper coming out on Greenland's ice sheet. What do you think? And then calling another one. What do you think? And then summarizing them. I would use an email string as a way to create a community discussion of a paper, and they were all kind of on the record. And then at Columbia, the idea, I basically said to Alex Halliday when he was new directing it, the Earth Institute and now the Climate School, we don't really there isn't really a place yet we have journalism school, it doesn't even have a school of communications, and we don't really talk to each other even on the campus. So what can we do around these challenges? Resilience, decarbonization, injustice. If you don't have the law school talking to the business school, talking to the philosophy department, talking to the journalism school at least a little bit, then you're missing these big ideas and opportunities. And then if you're not actually engaging with communities, and it's slowly shifting, but this gets to that proprietary. Everything we do, everything everyone here has done historically was proprietary. Professors profess, right? I'm telling you stuff. I've got this knowledge, this special knowledge. I'm going to stand here for an hour and give it to you. And then you write some papers. That's such a bad fit for the complexities of the Anthropocene, whether you call it that or just to call it the obscene, as Carl Safina does. We're not if you're not, and there are little tiny tastes of it. The Moore Foundation gave some money to some climate scientists at Columbia a couple of years ago to build a relationship with an Inupiat community in Kotzebue in the Arctic. And the money was really not like a science grant. They actually said it was to build a relationship so that they were co-producing some research on what all of our big science can do to help people in Kotzebue not die when they take their snowmobiles out on the sea ice. And to me, that's incredibly exciting. But it also shows you how hard this is. Because, how many NSF grants or how many journalism assignments are to just ask a question or to engage a community. They're like, go get the story, or what's the outcome of your research going to be? And so I think the doors have been opened a little bit to reveal some of these great possibilities. And what I'm doing at Columbia is still like just 2 people, and
Yeah.
but I
I mean,
see many chances for that to happen more.
I feel like that. I mean, that is kind of something that's a real obstacle too. That like the resources are just a lot less for people talking about acting on climate than they are for people talking about not acting on climate. I mean, that's documented. It's 10 to 1, like, so I don't, it would be nice if there was more support for more different types of communicating. I honestly, I find that, and I don't know if Max and Beth, if you found this too, that like the climate, I don't know, the sort of climate universe for a long time has sort of like poo-pooed communication as like not as worthy of investment as like hard science or whatever. I don't know. Even in the nonprofit space, I find that like there's a I don't know, just a talking about it as like a nice to have and not a must have.
It's interesting that you say that. And Max and I just had a nonprofit foundation, the Argosy Foundation, basically knocking on our door saying, okay, we're sick of having everybody see each other. We will give you money to do your climate comedy at a larger scale. So,
that's awesome.
There are
maybe
those,
it's changing.
Yeah. So I think people are understanding that until we tell a story to ourselves about ourselves that leads us towards the solutions, we're not going to get there. We're not going to put the story forward there. So that's just one example, but
it does seem, I mean, I do feel like that even in the media side, it's changed just from like 2018 to now in terms of like what you're allowed to write about as a climate story has shifted and includes like more, emotion. Human stuff. Yeah.
We've heard a lot about it. I mean, I think the way it was first framed as a pollution problem brought to bear natural physical scientists to help answer the questions of what's going on here. But then as we've been continuing to work on these issues, we've recognized the social sciences and humanities have a lot to offer. There's the scientific way of knowing and understanding these issues, and there's experiential, there's emotional, which has a whole range from fear to hope and aspiration. There's aesthetic ways of knowing through the arts. There's visceral ways of knowing. There's tactile. There's all these, and so I think, totally agree with you, Amy, that increasingly there's been this bringing in of different points of view. That's where I, have firm commitments in interdisciplinary collaborative approaches to try and grapple with these things. Because, Andy talked about at Columbia that if you're just one group and not talking to the others, you're not as capably addressing these challenges. And so I do think it's changed. And there's all kinds of, I think, ways to illustrate how it has been changing. But there's a lot of more work to do, no doubt.
Sorry. Oh, I was just going to say, in looking at, I've spent the last like 3-ish years looking at sort of the 150-year history of propaganda. And actually, like every single time the public has wrestled the story back from corporate interests, it's been through arts and culture. It's like a song or like...
It's so funny. That's what I was just going to share.
It's always something like that. Yeah.
We just did a show at CU Boulder called Climate Cabaret. It was a bunch of little songs that I'd written and plays from the climate change action platform that comes out of New York City, and climate change theater action. And there was one of the songs is this silly refrain about wind turbines, which are, onshore wind turbines are one of the top climate solutions. And one of the main obstacles is finding them ugly, not wanting them to be in your view. And so we had this ridiculous song, which was, wind turbines are beautiful, beautiful day and night. And it was like the Lion King parody, and it was silly. And one of the students who was in the show, her parents came and they were very skeptical. They're not really, they're not really all down with this whole climate change business and all that. And they came to her show because she was in it. And afterwards they said to her, you made some good points and that was interesting. And then a week later, she said they they texted her a little video of them all driving in eastern Colorado next to some wind turbines, and it's her and her mom and dad singing "Wind turbines are beautiful," and they thought it was so cute and funny. So it's like, here they are, these people who came with these views avowed and had this like cheering of heart and that retention, that stickiness of the message when delivered in a silly song.
Yeah. There's also, do you know the people at Culture Strike? Do you know that group?
No, I don't.
They are focused on arts and culture as like a way, a means of social change too. And I know Fabiana Rodriguez, who's like the artist that started that group, she talks a lot about how, you know, over the course of history, every time there's been a major shift, like she uses the example of gay marriage, that you start to see it show up in arts and culture like about 10 years before you see a policy change, you know? So she's like, we're behind on climate. We need more climate culture stuff because, So
Culture Strike. I made a note.
Yeah, they're cool.
I think that's on this for sure.
I think that's still their name. They might have changed it. Hold on. I'm going to just fact check myself here while you continue.
I would say, you know, there's
also, I think the work of Chantal Billadou, who did with others, the theater for the climate change theater action, they have done so much to prompt all these happenings that are small scale, large scale in communities around the world, and really get the different perspectives represented. That seems really important.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I have to update it. Their name is now the Center for Cultural Power.
Oh, right.
It used to be Culture Strike. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to show an example of humor that came from someone I know that Beth knows. Raleigh.
He's
Raleigh
great.
Williams. What's his last name? He's doing these.
Now they have super good lawyers, so they probably won't face any consequences for their action. But after years of proudly denying climate change, they have finally all quietly accepted the bill. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just Google climate change and then the name of any oil company and go buck wild on their corporate website. Yep. Hey man, can you grab that laptop?
Raleigh
all
was
of America's insurance companies and economist groups agree that climate change is slowly taking the baseball bat to the balls of the American economy. All of them. Conservative, liberal, young, old, Dracula. They're not being paid off by the climate because that's not a thing.
So Raleigh is great, and he does. I think he exemplifies some of what we're talking about. This potential, and especially in young people, to sort of take back the conversation and to pull the rug out from underneath those who are just trying to use simple methods to distract or confuse us. And I think that can propagate. I was tweeting the last several years the hashtag "Make reality cool again." Can we do that? It's the cool factor that I think is really hard, because you have to want reality. And when we're in this kind of Facebook algorithmized world where we're sucked to things because they validate anger or aggravate us, and the people designing the algorithms know that, then how do you pull people back from that and still make it cool? How do you make reality cool? So I'm hoping that people like Raleigh are helping do that. Maybe in journalism, we can do more of that. Or maybe Raleigh can work with Amy to take some of that great trove of stuff you've got.
We like each other. We're like social media friends. So yes, we should.
Oh, good. Well, I should introduce you. It would be great. I think that's where some of this collaborative potential can build forward. Now, I think one of you, Max, do you have to go?
I do have another thing starting up now. It's true.
Okay. Is there a last takeaway message from you before that happens?
Well, there's so much work to be done. I mean, I will just say, you know, as we've been having this conversation, I spent 2 weekends ago at this conference the Heartland Institute.
Oh,
Yeah,
Oh, you did.
I
Took
did.
one for the team.
I went to it 10 years ago. I went back again. I interviewed about half of the speakers. I sat through the whole thing. And there's not a lot of cool factor there. I will say that, Andy.
what about Lord
Yeah.
Moncton? No.
Yeah, there's a lot
lots of
more
stories
to
about him.
yeah, and I'm still processing on a lot of what was said. So there's just so much that's going on here. And back to your point, Andy, I agree 100%. There's no silver bullet. We just got to keep moving and do good work in this world and band together to meet the scale of these challenges. So I appreciate you continuing to do this work.
Yes.
Happy to have been a part of this conversation with you, Amy, Beth, and Andy. So thanks a lot.
I have to go as
Well,
well.
it's-
I would just add to what Max says, that providing opportunities for people to experience positive emotions in association with the issue of climate change has really been my work and our work with Max. And I think that it's not the only piece that needs to be done, but it's part of it that needs to be done. And I think that we just need to like throw a better party, like make it fun. Like when you focus on solutions, it feels good. And you're getting the same amount of work done, but you're just staying solutions focused. And we find that that's one of the ways for effective climate communication anyway. So there's like the co-benefits of that stance. I think really just keep coming and keep giving. So that would be my last words of advice.
Those are pretty good words. And Amy, if you could stay on just another minute or two, that'd be
Yeah,
awesome.
I can, sure.
You gotta go.
Thanks so
No,
much.
I can.
All right.
See you all.
So say goodbye to Boulder. Boulder, Colorado is leaving the
Bye,
show.
Boulder.
All right. Thank you.
And yeah, let's just briefly get back one more time to the story of the story of climate change. The work again. I don't want to leave off without digging a little bit more at the things you've revealed recently and what you said in that piece in Rolling Stone. So, hold on, I just wanted to go back to your rigged. Oh, opening. Well, we'll get there in a minute. So what would be your hope after what we just heard about the pathway from revealing what you've been doing with rigged and drilled to impact?
Mm-hmm.
You have an interesting. You're very passionate, but at the same time, you seem very realistic.
I am very realistic. Yeah. I mean, the part of the reason that I did rigged was that I felt like, two things. One, I had covered a lot of the propaganda stuff in drilled, but I know that there's a significant number of people who will not self-select to consume any content related to climate, even if they actually care about climate. And I'm not talking about like climate deniers. There's a significant number of people who are just like, it's going to be depressing or boring, I wanted to make sure to get stuff to that audience, but I also feel like I did a season of drilled where I followed around a group of crab fishermen, and they had become the first industry to try to sue the fossil fuel industry over their attempts to block climate policy. And it was fascinating because a significant number of that group of people to this day still do not, quote unquote, believe in climate science, but they had been shown a bunch of documents that showed that the oil companies were taking various measures to protect their infrastructure and industry from the impacts of climate change. So they kind of had this attitude of like, well, who cares what's causing it? They knew it was happening and they were taking steps to adapt, and they were telling us not to worry about it when actually we should have been worrying about it. And maybe we could have taken steps to make our business climate proof. So it was all about fairness and access to information. And it was such a huge penny drop moment for me because I'm less like, less than 40% of the US are college educated. Probably a significant percentage of the college educated people would not consider themselves to be particularly good at understanding science. So why have we made believing science the the entry point here? That seems really like a bad place to start when we have this very easy narrative of there was information withheld from you. There was a lack of fairness here. People with more power who knew more than you used it to do something and didn't give you the same opportunity to. That's it's like a toddler can understand fairness, So I don't know. For me too, that's kind of like behind a lot of the rigged stuff is just like, look, it doesn't like whether you are whether your sort of tribal identity is conservative or liberal or Democrat or Republican or whatever, I think like there's pretty decent agreement around the idea that everybody should be operating with the same information. And if we can kind of show people, look, here's all the primary source documents of exactly how information was strategically manipulated to get you to think and behave a certain way, then maybe we can get people to just kind of, I don't know, like think for themselves a little bit more and be a bit more critical and kind of evaluate the information that they're getting, which I think could help, But I don't know if I'm pessimistic, but I'm certainly not like Pollyannish about, what might happen here. Including, actually, I really feel like the whole accountability thing has been like misinterpreted or mischaracterized or whatever. Like I was saying before, okay, sure. Like, yes, I think like the oil companies have done terrible things and, there should be consequences for actions and all of that stuff. But I'm more concerned with the fact that like, there's really no attention being paid to like, okay, but how do we prevent the next industry from doing the same thing? Like how do we get on top of the fact that, there's this whole information system that is governed by money and by power. And I don't know. Anyway, I actually asked Ro Khanna about that too. I was like, okay, but like, what are you going to do to make it not happen again? And he was like, he was kind of like, I don't know. What do you mean? And I'm like, I just think there needs to be more than fines and court cases, so yeah.
Well, I think what you're identifying is that the information environment story really is the big story, especially when you think about what does or doesn't change things in Washington.
Yes.
You think about this as a climate issue. If you're out there clamoring for some outcome on climate and you're not aware of the fundamental structural problems in Congress, then you're sort of might be battling the wrong monster.
Right, exactly. It's like, and honestly, this is where I would really like to see the media be a bit more self-reflective about this too. I think there's been a total lack of accountability in the media sphere of, how like what our role has been in perpetuating certain frameworks and narratives and the fact that like, I mean, because sometimes people will say like, oh, I feel so powerless. It's so overwhelming. There's so many forces against us, whatever. But like, if you're a journalist and you have a platform, you actually have a ton of power and you should be using it for good, So, yeah.
Well, and that's why it's valuable that you're out there doing what you're doing, including you and others who, now me a little bit, poking the media giant just a little to say, when I did my piece on the New York Times, here's what I wrote recently about the Washington Post, and I got the Post to they quote unquote fixed the problem with these pull quotes. Their fix was to simply add a label to them, a little tiny label, that made it clear. But the media are enabling this stuff, and Twitter too. I mean, you and I, when you're on Twitter, I guarantee you every 5 minutes you're seeing a pop-up ad of Mobil or Exxon or.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
there's
and
more to do.
that's weird to me because Twitter, banned political ads, and which is why you don't see, the counter argument from environmental NGOs on there. But somehow all of the oil companies have found various ways around those rules. So I mean, that's the thing too, is like you're seeing this on social media and in newsletters and in podcasts. I don't know if you listen to a lot of podcasts, but the advertising in those is like, it's atrocious. It's the sort of advertising that would never be allowed on radio or TV because it's like wildly overstating the potential of carbon capture, or how much Exxon is investing in algae or whatever. But they can get away with it because it's not governed by the FCC. So
Wow.
so it's like that's the reason that they're investing so much in Facebook and Twitter and newsletters, advertising and podcasts, is because those are all the media channels that are not regulated by the FCC. So they can greenwash much more in those venues than they can in sort of print media, TV or radio.
Has that been written up enough yet?
I don't think it's been enough. I don't think it's been enough. No. I mean, and I asked NPR about it because I thought, well, okay, I can understand a little bit if it's happening at like even the New York Times, where it's a private, they're private, they have a need for revenue, and the business model for media has been terrible for the last 20 years, right? But NPR, it's like you have a mandate, to educate the public. You're supposed to be public media, all of this stuff. Why would you have different rules for your podcast than your broadcast? And they just said, well, it's not illegal in the podcast. And I was like, I feel like your ethics policy should be more than we do everything that's not illegal,
Wow. That's
so
well. Again, Amy Westervelt, it was great to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'd like to try to get regularized again. I used to have a Friday early afternoon kind of media roundtable.
Oh, that's fun.
When I started it, and a year and a half ago, it was all on COVID. But the idea of just a gaggle, just to get together and talk through these issues and see what we can do together or as a community makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
So we'll talk further about that.
Okay.
Because we are all in these little isolated
squares on screens. Yeah.
Yeah, but we can convene more. So thanks again.
Yeah.
And good luck with Rigged.
Thank you.
I'll do my best to propagate it. And thanks again to Max Boykoff and Beth Osnes. Onward and upward. Back to COP26 for me.
Yeah, good luck. Bye.
Bye.